Hello, and welcome to another edition of Close Mode, the Enterprise Sales Show. I'm Brian Dietmeyer, CEO of Close Strong. And today I'm super lucky to be here with Kayleigh Hogan, who's had multiple roles in sales enablement, most recently, Director of Revenue Enablement. And Kayleigh, welcome to the show.
Thanks so much for having me. I really admire what you're talking about with people here and exploring enterprise sales and then tying in RevOps and enablement and seeing the whole go-to-market machine together and thinking about it in a closing fashion is really admirable.
Well, yeah, and it's we. I feel like lately, maybe kind of on purpose, we've been leaning into the human issue and stuff. And when you and I were speaking last week about just the human side of enterprise selling,
Yeah.
and one of the conversations we were having is about sort of implementation and adoption, which is like everybody's frustrated with. We just rolled out this tool, we just rolled out this training, and nobody's using it. And you mentioned some sort of pretty spectacular adoption rates, and then you started talking to me about design thinking and empathy mapping, and since then I've actually done a little work on understanding both, and they're both like unbelievably tied to the human side of stuff. So, but for our listeners, can you define design thinking and empathy mapping at a high level?
Yeah, definitely. So design thinking is more of a non-linear process that was designed and implemented in the 1960s, and they were trying to tie it to other core learning concepts, so like science and just the human side of things. So just adding a little bit more scientific application to it. It encompasses a few different steps. The first one being empathize, which to me, I worked at a company whose main motto was empathy, and
Yeah,
that's actually where I learned the concept of design thinking and empathy mapping. So the first step is empathize. You have to understand and have a human centered approach to problem solving before you can go on and start to define what the problem is and what the solution might be. Then you start to ideate on the potential solutions. Then you prototype. So you come up with a couple of different options for those users to test. And then you test with them and you create feedback loops. And so I mentioned a second ago that it's nonlinear. So say you get, with especially in the world of software, things are changing so
yeah,
rapidly. Maybe you get halfway through designing an AI product today and your biggest competitor launches one and you're just like, you know what? No, we're going to double down on this other area that we're really strong. We're going to pull out of the ideate phase and we're going to go back to empathize and try to understand what our users are needing. So I'm a huge fan of making it more centered around the end user of something. And so in enablement, I read this study last year by Seismic that talked about how 2/3 of all content does not get used in an
yeah,
organization.
yeah,
I pour my heart and my soul into the content that I create, and to know that stuff that I stay up late at night isn't getting used, like that breaks my heart. But that
yeah,
also indicates to me that there's a bigger problem that I didn't design it in a way that's actually helpful to the end user. And when it comes to enterprise sales, I've joined organizations that have 3,000 to 10,000 different pieces of content they want their sales team to know about or be able to find and leverage at certain points of the sales cycle. And so that's where I saw the history of it and how it was being pulled into product management. There are a couple of books on design thinking and enablement, and that was
yeah.
just where like I have goosebumps about it. My degree is in psychology, so helping
Excuse me.
people feel seen and heard is the first step to
Well,
getting
yeah,
on.
and that was such, and we'll talk about your sort of results and adoption rates in a moment. I want to ask you about those, but when you talked about the empathy mapping part, like I made as you were talking through that, and the additional research I did, it's the thought, feelings, and experiences of people, and it occurred to me that like you are using that to make the decision on how and what kind of should be rolled out. And I feel like that is such a different approach. There's a lot of surveys and maybe some focus groups, but there's not so much emphasis on the human part. Can you talk a little bit about that empathy mapping and how you think that got sort of stakeholder buy-in up front?
Yeah, definitely. So empathy maps they're highly visual, and I've created a template. They were originally designed by a gentleman named Dave Gray out of X-Plane. He's a consulting group. He was the co-founder, and the whole point was either in individual settings, small group settings, or large group settings, being able to capture what everyone is seeing, saying, hearing, and doing with regards to existing process or problem, or maybe in regards to something that you're trying to roll out and see if it's going to work. So the first point of being able to, understand what people are doing, and especially in enablement, my stakeholders are usually the sales leaders, the sales team, the post sales team, the pre sales team, the sales ops team, the CRO,
Yeah.
and some of the XLT. And so, going into any type of program that I'm working on and developing, I need to understand what all of these people, all these stakeholders are experiencing right now before I can, because I'm not going to just solve it with training. I need to solve it in a multifaceted approach in order to meet all of these learners and stakeholders where they're at. So if I gather an empathy map and I say, hey, what are you guys seeing in the environment right now?
Yeah.
What are you not seeing? What are you saying? What have you heard others say? What do you think you could be saying? What do I think you could be saying? What are you hearing? What are you hearing from your manager? What are you hearing from your peers? What are you hearing from your friends and family or from
Hmm.
LinkedIn, the industry? What are you saying? Or what are you doing? And then, so what have you observed, or what are we observing you doing, etc. So those four things are going to be the first piece. And then finally, you ask those people in a either individual basis or as a group collectively, like, what pains are you experiencing today regarding this process? What gains are you looking to gain in a future version of it? And then my favorite thing to do as an enabler is to bring either all of those stakeholders or a subset of them back together in kind of a forum and give them a readout of what they all said to me if I collected the results individually, or I'll bring them back later on after we've all had some time to kind of process what we've documented together, and then we start talking about,
See,
okay, what
and yeah,
ideas.
I'm sorry, Kayleigh. I think that like that's the part where I feel like, for those naysayers that like, oh, this is all soft. Like if I'm going to anticipate what someone might push back on, right, is that it's soft. And for me, going back to the stakeholders and say, this is what you heard, this is what you felt. I believe that's where you start getting buy-in, and we just don't spend enough time there. And I'm wondering, kind of three questions. So we have to collect this stuff, and then you talked about a map. We have to analyze it in some way. And then I'm wondering about outputs and insights. So let's go to the first one. How are you collecting this? Is it surveys? Is it focus groups? Is it voice?
Yeah. You can do it. Honestly, it depends on what kind of problem you're trying to solve and how big of a group you're trying to get information from. I've leveraged empathy maps at companies that are 6,000 people, and I've leveraged them at companies where we have 37 people, so uh, you can individually interview people and capture that information. That's usually my favorite way to do it, Brian,
Okay.
because it allows us to be human with each other. It allows you to not have to worry about what someone over there is going to think or feel about what you're saying in relaying your experience. Like, for instance, if we have a sales process where we're getting stuck right in like proof of concept or something, and I go and I ask the sales reps, or I ask a couple top performing sales reps, why are we getting stuck here in proof of concept? They're probably not going to say to me in a group setting, well, my manager really likes to go and look through every single detail of this, i.e., they're the
Yeah.
micromanager. And so I get stuck here and my deals stall and they lose momentum. Time is the killer of all deals. So they're probably not going to say that in a group setting. So depending on the problem, you'll want to decide how you gather the information. If you're trying to move really quickly, doing it in a large group setting and giving everyone sticky notes and just putting a really big empathy map on a whiteboard
Yeah.
is a good way to get some progress. You can even do it virtually.
Hmm.
Small groups, again, you can just have a couple of interviewers that are gathering notes and interviewing people. But my favorite is doing just a virtual coffee like you and I are chatting now and just saying, hey, Brian, I'm taking over the strategic account planning process here at XYZ Co. And I just, I noticed that you're someone who owns a lot of the account plans or the strategic plans that should be account plans. And I just want to understand, like, what's your perspective on it? So can I ask you a couple of questions around what are you seeing? What are you saying? What are you hearing? What are you doing? What pains are you experiencing today? And what gains are you
Mhm.
looking to experience tomorrow in this version? And as soon as they get through communicating all of that to me, Brian, they're a little bit more bought in to what I come back to them with as a prototype. That's my
Yeah.
favorite.
I agree. And when I think about analyzing that data, and you talked about empathy maps, I've seen the word maps that are cool that you can get from, conversational intelligence tools, that sort of thing. And I'm wondering, what you use. I could also see even throwing that stuff into, Gemini and saying, okay, give me, give me the kind of summary. But yeah, what are you using to pull that together visually and otherwise?
I love that question. Thank you so much. I've done it a couple of different ways. I'm a big fan of, yeah, you could throw it into some AI and have it do a word cloud for you. Back when I was first doing my first empathy maps, I would use an actual word cloud generator, and I would just copy
Okay.
everyone's responses or my notes, and I'd put them in there and then have it give me the themes. But my favorite way to do it is to create a summary empathy map and say, these are the common themes I'm hearing in each one of these categories. This is what I'm hearing collectively across you guys around seeing, saying, hearing, and doing. Here are the problems and the pains that you're experiencing, and here's the gains we're all looking to collectively,
Hmm.
get in the next version. So based on that information, stakeholders, here's my 3 ideas for how we address this problem. Which
Yeah.
2 should we put some time and resource in, and you give me feedback on, because I don't want to take too much time out of your day selling. You only get 39% of your time in front of a customer actually selling. So I want to minimize the amount that I'm asking you for stuff, but I also want to maintain your buy-in.
Yep. And I'm gonna sneak in a question, and I imagine people know that I've prepped you with some of the things I want to talk about, but this one I didn't, and it occurs to me like I'm wondering, I'm going back to sort of confidence level and statistical validation. Like, can that be provided with an empathy map to say, I know within, 95% confidence that this is kind of what the group feels on this thing, and then we can get to how does that impact what we're rolling out. But yeah, what's the level of that
Totally
sort of
fair.
analysis?
Yeah, I guess you're giving me ideas for a company that I should maybe start and leveraging AI to do something to that effect. So thank you for that idea. If
Yeah.
you want to be a co-founder, let me know. So when you gather stakeholders and you give them that readout, sometimes there is a bit of disagreement, and especially if it's from like a leader maybe that doesn't have the same perspective on that process as the rest of the group. And that's when you might want to be a bit more strategic in how you regroup the
Yeah.
stakeholders.
Yeah.
So instead of having like for my sales advisory board, I like having a couple of folks from enterprise and commercial and mid-market and small to medium business. I like having top performers, moderate, medium performers that want to be top performers, and then maybe some lower performers that are kind of like, I'm here because I'm here. So I like to ask all of them questions and get their feedback as well. And so I'm going to have some diverse answers there. Usually leaders don't always agree. So I'm going to want to have a subset of those stakeholders in the readout. And then I can say, hey, I'm not going to break confidentiality of who specifically said this, but I have enough conversations with people to see this as a theme. And if we don't think this is a theme, then let's build a couple of prototypes with that in mind. And if we come back and we empathy map again, and that becomes a thing that bubbles up again, we need to have an honest conversation about it.
Yeah.
So you're
Yeah.
right.
And
There's not as much metric behind it, but
right.
it is about, again, going back to the humanist. It's not, oh, and I loved at the recent Sales Enablement Collective conference I was at, they talked about how you have to tie back to one performance metric in enablement. We sometimes try to tie to too many things. And
Yeah.
I think before you can go in an empathy map, you have to say, what problem are we trying to solve? And what are we going to say success looks like? What does good look like coming out the other side of this? Or what's the expectation? And then we can leverage kind of that metric and align the perspectives we're getting from people to that metric in the future state.
It's interesting because I didn't realize this, but we do a thing called a diagnostic, and we run some surveys that do have some statistical analysis we can do in benchmarking, but we also do a lot of interviews, and I think we might be doing empathy mapping because it's one of the tee ups is, if I'm interviewing you, okay, Kayleigh, you're safe. Say whatever you need to say in this interview, and I might use quotes, but I'm never going to put your name next to anything. And it's
Yeah.
interesting because after 7 or 8 interviews of executives, 2 or 3 themes pop up. We'll then typically throw a couple illustrative quotes like along with those, and it's interesting what we hear more often than not is, yep, you nailed it, that's it, and there isn't any math behind that, but it's very rare. And the themes emerge pretty quickly. I wonder if you find that too, because I often say, after the third interview, I kind of already know what the 2 or 3 themes are going to be, and then I can double click on subsequent interviews to get under what those themes are.
Exactly. Exactly. It does sound like you're doing your own version of empathy mapping, first of all. And I
Mm,
agree. When I join a new organization, I like to go and empathy map top performers. I actually have one sitting somewhere on my desk from when I joined a company, and I went and talked to one of my sales leaders that was going to be a stakeholder of mine. I just literally drew the box on my paper like this. Hold on, I'm drawing you the most ugly sticky note. So I've got this little
yeah.
box here. So you can say see, hear, feel, say, do, and then pains and gains. So I literally just on a piece of paper, I'm writing that out and I'm talking to him about it. So
Wait,
um,
who needs Google Slides or PowerPoint? We have stickies.
we have stickies or a
That's
piece of
all.
paper. I just going back to the human bit. I actually do feel like when if you're taking notes, like I've collected empathy maps in forms and in surveys and stuff. But I think if you have a conversation with people and you let them know
Yeah.
I'm not doing this to try to collect data that's going to get anyone in trouble. I want to actually understand why account planning is not getting adopted. Oh, it's taking you guys 15 hours, 15 plus hours to manually create one, and you review it for 30 minutes with your leadership team, and then it collects digital dust for a year. So you don't see the point in investing that time. That makes a lot of sense. What if I was able to cut that time in half or even into an eighth of that amount of time? Would you be
Yeah.
more interested in doing it for your top deals? Okay, cool. Now we're plugged in. But yeah, you're right. You can double click a little bit further once you've kind of gone in and seen what's their general perspective on, things today, and then you can get more specific and empathy map an existing process problem or something you want to move towards. So maybe like a new sales methodology or a new buyer interview program or a new win review form or something like
Yeah.
that. So
Well, one of the things that hooked me early on in our previous conversation, you gave me some sort of implementation and adoption rate. So there was an initiative, and can you talk a little bit about the evidence for that initiative? Like at what rate was it adopted, and how would you correlate the design of that thing to
yeah.
this implementation?
So I'm not gonna lie, it's been a few years and I was doing my calculations very manually in a spreadsheet. So if you're gonna be like, what was your exact formula for calculating this? I'll
No,
be like, let
not
me
at
get back
all.
to you. But the general gist was I joined a large enterprise CCAS company that sells contact centers to everything from a mom and pop shop that needs someone to answer their phones or needs a phone system to route things and an IVR, etc. IVR is interactive voice response system. So that's the thing that's like, I'll press one to go to sales, blah, blah,
Right.
blah. So I joined that company and they were saying, hey, we need strategic account plans for the top 5,000 accounts at
Hmm.
this company because they are targeting the top 20 accounts and the top 20 companies, the F20 and all the
Yeah.
way down to small to medium business. And they felt like at least 5,000 of those accounts, especially in the enterprise and top part of the business, needed an account plan. So for them, an account plan was an organizational chart, what's going on in that organization. So say you're selling to like Delta Airlines. So who are we talking to at Delta Airlines? What's the main goal that the CEO has put in place this year? What are the main initiatives they're trying to organize to contribute towards that goal? Who's responsible for them? And then where do we fit in? What other solutions and programs are they putting out to contribute to these things? And how are we aligning to those stakeholders? This is a lot of really great information, and sales reps have to communicate it to their
Yeah.
leadership team, usually verbally a lot throughout their sales process, and it gets annoying for them. So capturing it in an account plan kind of makes sense because then you can, when someone asks you for it, you can just point them to that piece of information and then they can come to you with that layer deeper of questions like we just talked about. So for them, it was a very manual process where sales reps were going in and manually creating slides. And not to bash on sales reps creativity and slide creation, but it wasn't consistent and it
Right.
wasn't branded
Yeah.
well. It didn't, it was trying to look more complex than it was, and it was really difficult for them to create them, and it was really difficult for the leadership team to understand data out of it. So I came in and they were like, you get the account planning program, and I was like,
Yeah.
oh, what do I do with this? And there were only a couple hundred, I think there was under 200 account plans initially. And when I started to do empathy mapping, I empathy mapped with some of the AEs that were doing them, some of the AEs that weren't doing them and should be doing them, their sales leaders, again, some of the ones that were really big fans of account plans, and then others that were kind of like,
Yeah.
I'm more
Yeah.
into the transactional deal piece, come back when you have some pipeline. And then I kind of lost my train of thought there. So then I chatted with those, folks, and I understood, hey, these are all the little issues that we have
Yeah.
around this account planning process. And then when I started to understand, I learned that the SEs were also being pulled in and the solutions architects were being pulled in. And I uncovered that it was taking them 15 plus hours to make these plans. And I was like,
Wow.
well, no wonder you guys aren't doing them.
Right.
So I then started coming up with some requirements with them. That was kind of that gains category from the
Yep.
empathy map. What things are you guys looking to get from this next version of account planning? And so I went and found a few different tools, got some demos from them, showed kind of condensed versions of those demos to my stakeholders, got it down to 3, piloted those 3, then launched one of them. I helped build and test it in our Salesforce sandbox. And then all of those people that I empathy mapped with were my advisory board, my sales advisory board that would go in and test it and throw rotten tomatoes at it. And I loved it. They were always like, I feel like I'm being mean. And I was like, no, I actually want you to use this.
Yeah.
You are going to be the one using this. And if there's anything in here that makes you go, oh, I want to get up and go make a cup of coffee, that's where I need to focus. I want you
Yep.
to talk to me about
Well,
that.
and what strikes me too, and anybody who's listened to more than a few episodes know, I'm a huge, and my partners on all this, a huge fan of slow down to hurry up,
Yeah.
and for people that are unbelievably action oriented, all they hear is the slow down, and so what not the oh, and we're going to hurry up later, and what I'm hearing is like this process again with the focus on implementation, adoption, change management, however we want to call that, this pre-work driving the adoption later. And I think it's funny because I think one of the numbers either I read about your stuff or you talked to me about was like 186%. I was wondering how we get to 186% adoption, but
Yeah.
part of
So,
it is because I think I'm saying, yeah, you took that time up front that
mhm.
saved you a bunch of time in the back end because people
Yeah.
actually made the change.
Yes, exactly. So I leveraged all of those folks to like throw every rotten tomato they possibly could at it. And there was one sales rep who was like over 100% of quota, and he literally said to me when we got one of the demos, he was like, Kayleigh, this tool is meant for people that are at like 70% of quota. I'm at
Right.
100% of quota. I don't need this. And
Yep.
I was like, well, so and so when you hit 200% of your quota and you get to buy your next lake house, I get to come over and have a party with you. So that he jokingly laughed about that. But anyway, when it came time to actually train the rest of the team on the account planning tool that we wound up choosing and leveraging and creating an output for, I didn't even really have to lead the training. The sales reps and the sales
Right.
leaders did. They were so bought into it. And
Yep.
that was what made the adoption. I'm getting goosebumps. It was the coolest. I got program of the year for that
Yeah.
program
Awesome.
because they were so bought in. It wasn't just the shiny new thing. Everyone was bought in. And I even had small to medium business reps filling out account plans because, when they have 1,000 accounts, they're like, how am I going to account plan for 1,000 accounts? And it's like, no, don't. Pick
Yeah.
5 that you actually think you might be able to land this year, or even in the first 6 months of this year, and do the account plan for those. Get all of your stakeholders bought in internally and externally on here's where we're at, here's the beat we're marching to, and here's how we're going to get these people bought in so that we're trusted advisors and they want to buy more and more and more from us.
Yeah.
So anyway, I leveraged those folks to go in and train the rest of the team, and we went in under 2 months from 180 plus account plans to like over 1,000, just like within a couple of weeks. Like everyone that attended that training went and created a couple of plans. I was looking at when people were logging in, and I was seeing really consistent logging in, especially in that first 6 months. And even as I was exiting, the month over month adoption of those plans was 46%. So I was
Yeah.
still seeing growth and people continuing to create plans. And this was a year and a half after it launched. So
Yeah. And
the
it's
186% was going from that
oh,
180 to like the 1,000 in
oh
a very short period of time. And then towards the end, it was the 46% month over month growth. And
yeah.
I sent that to my SVP of sales ops, and he sent me the nicest Slack message about how this program literally changed the trajectory of the company. The chief of staff even presented account planning at sales kickoff that year because they were like, this is the thing we all need to be doing. And now in
Yeah.
2024, with this macroeconomic climate we're in, I feel even more passionate about people having to do account plans. But you can't design a very big, ugly, complex account plan, or your reps aren't going to do it, or they're not going to adopt it over time. And so that
Yeah.
was where the lean piece came in.
Well, and that it's yeah, there's so many things that it's like, okay, this initiative, this thing, this account planning thing, it's better, faster, and there's still the human change piece that I'm still going to do it the way I've always done it. One of our board members and advisors, he was talking to me about, he's like, here, and you just said it. It's like, here's the thing, we're announcing SKO, and then after SKO, everybody goes back and does it the way they used to do it, right? And this
Exactly.
interrupts that flow. And he, he's an industry analyst, been around for a while, and he was like, "This is such a huge problem," and that's why I wanted to talk about this today, because the evidence is there, but it takes a little bit more work up front to
It
begin
does.
to get that buy-in, and I feel like that's missed. That's
I
and
completely
yeah,
agree. I
yep,
completely agree. And I think especially in supporting organizations like ops and enablement, like everything always feels really reactive. But I think the more we can step back and say, what problem are we actually trying to solve here? And that's why, again, I really like design thinking. This gentleman named Horace Vertel in like the 1960s came up with this term wicked problems. And these are going to be complex, ambiguous, non yes or no problems that need to be
yeah,
solved. And then in the 90s, somebody named Richard Buchanan wrote this article called like Wicked Problems in Design Thinking. And he applied that whole concept around we have to, when things are ambiguous, we really need to get back to that human side of it. And that's what's actually going to drive the buy-in, not stats, not metrics, not some person in an ivory tower telling you have to do something. It's really going and taking that time at the front to be like, what does everyone think?
yeah,
What is your reality right now?
right,
What do you want it to be? Like, if I just stopped and asked you, like, hey, do you, like, just in your regular life as a human
yeah,
being, Brian, what do you need to be successful? What are you
yeah,
seeing? What are you saying? What are you hearing? What are you doing today to be successful? And what do you want to be doing tomorrow? All of a sudden, you're like, holy crap, Kayleigh, you don't just
right,
want
right.
to blab at me and teach me something. You actually care about where I'm
Yep.
at. And
And
to me,
which is why I've been leaning into more of the human stuff on these, because I feel like we don't pay enough attention to it at all. And I have to guess, by the way, if I had to guess, the wicked problem guys, that they might be Boston people. That I mean,
probably.
wicked. I can hear the
Horace,
wicked problem
yeah,
coming out of
yes,
somebody, a Bostonian's mouth. Yeah, you've been.
absolutely.
Yeah, I love this topic. You've been super generous with your time and your ideas, and I also have to say, one of the things that's very refreshing is how much you care about this. There are very few people who get chills from the work that they do. So, and you've mentioned that a couple times, and
Yeah.
and it's really helpful. And I think you do have a link to resources. We'll make sure when we post these that we'll put a link if people want the deeper dive from this tease that we've given today.
Definitely. Thank you. I will say at that company, I was at sales kickoff. They held sales kickoff at like Universal Studios in Florida. And we got to ride on a few roller coasters and stuff. They bought out part of the park. And I was literally talking to one of the leaders on the marketing team excitedly about account planning and the empathy maps I did. And he literally grabbed my shoulders and was like, we are supposed to be having fun right now. And you are talking about work stuff. And I get that you're
Yeah.
excited about it, but we're going to talk about work stuff. And I was like, I am having fun talking about work stuff.
Right. Exactly.
So
Exactly.
anyway, I
Well,
really
for
appreciate the time. Thanks so much for having me. And yeah, I'd love to share those resources.
yeah, thank you, and for those moms and dads who work from home and have kids, thank you for having your new baby at the park while we did this. So, for
Of course.
anyone else who's had to do similarly,
Yes,
thank
of
you.
course.